interchain communication was going to become very, very important. And I think, anyone with a reasonable computer science background will understand that no single blockchain can possibly handle all the trends. If we put everything on chain, like it's just not doable. And so that problem would have to get solved at some point. You could say, well, maybe we can deal with that later. And I think some people did take that approach. And so many ecosystems now, like, Avalanche, Polygon, the layer twos, everyone has a different approach now to trying to solve this problem. But I think Derek Yu, who is the founder of the MoonBeam project, he had the foresight to see, hey, this is something that should be tackled earlier because it will make things easier down the road.
This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is one of the top crypto platforms out there, which allows you to easily buy, sell, trade Bitcoin and the top altcoins in the market. Uphold lists 260 plus cryptocurrencies. They also allow you to trade precious metals such as gold, silver, palladium, and platinum. I've been a user of Uphold since 2018, so I can vouch for this platform. They have full transparency reports, and they don't commingle or lend out your funds. They also have a great product called Vault, which is an assisted self-custody product. Vault allows you to maintain custody of your funds, and the keys are split. So Uphold holds one and you hold two. And if there's any issues, if you lose one of your keys, Uphold will help restore these keys and you can maintain access to your funds. It's 24/7 instant trading. It's trustless. So this is a great feature that can give you peace of mind where you don't have to worry about if you lose your private keys and much more. So if you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome to the Thinking Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Tony Edward, and with me today is Aaron Evans, who is the head of operations at the MoonBeam Foundation. Aaron, great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tony. Happy to be here.
Aaron, I'm excited to learn about MoonBeam. We were talking before the recording. I've heard about MoonBeam over the years. I've covered news around MoonBeam. I've spoken to Michael Arrington about his investment in it, but I never got a chance to do a deep dive. So I'm hoping to get that today. So really great to have you on. Before we get into all things MoonBeam, tell us about yourself, where you're from, and what's your professional background.
Sure. Yeah. No. I am based in Ottawa, Canada. I come from a software engineering background, and I've been in software engineering, building engineering teams and platforms for the last, 25 years. Prior to getting into Web3, I ran a engineering organization for a SaaS platform in Web2. It was a global communications platform and had, software that offered solutions like this. You wouldn't have heard of them, but they produced like a video conferencing and so forth. And so I had a team of about 150, 170 people up until about 4 years ago when I moved over to getting into Web3 and started up the MoonBeam Foundation.
So what was your first encounter with Bitcoin? What was your aha moment? And in addition, why did you want to come work in this space?
Yeah, so I think for me, so I kind of watched really from the sidelines. I was really busy at my old thing running this like global platform with like data centers around the world. And always kind of was interested in Bitcoin, but I guess I wasn't super convinced, about crypto and so forth. It had its ups and downs. And coming from a space where we're building platforms that do tens of thousands of transactions per second, and you kind of look at the scale of blockchain platforms, you're kind of like, gee, I don't know if it's going to work. But I think really, in some of the I don't know if there was really ever an aha moment for Bitcoin, but I think I really started to get it when I was exposed to Ethereum, and seeing the potential of when you add that additional smart contracts, so you can actually do some programmatic things on the chains that allow you to do more advanced use cases and so forth. I think, there's been, I think one of the things I think that everyone in that if you buy into Web3 has to kind of go through at some point is, the realization that, what is value is just like a social agreement. If, people sort of have to kind of believe it has value. And that sounds strange, but at the same time, that is really all it is. Like, why did we think gold had value or money or whatever else? And so I think, I think for anyone in the space who is committed to the space, they've had to overcome that realization. And that happened for me, probably 4 or 5 years ago or something like that. I think what really attracted me to the space was that even when we were getting started with our communications platform, in like, I don't know, 2006, I think it was, or something like this, we were just 4 guys, but we looked at the space and the incumbents, and we saw how it was ripe for disruption. And in other startups that I've been a part of before, that was always sort of a central thing. We just wanted to, be this disrupting force. And I think Web3 has the potential to be a massive disruptive force, and the energy and the enthusiasm that it's just contagious. And that really attracted me to the space. And I had some friends that I had worked with previously that were in the space and doing some cool things, and asked me to kind of get involved. And I jumped at the chance.
Now you mentioned, the social acceptance, right? That we all accept, okay, and believe in this thing or this asset, and then it becomes, the norm. Everybody in society agrees upon, okay, Bitcoin is digital gold. But let's talk about Ethereum for a sec. So you have that layer of this social agreement. You have maybe the software element, right? That people are using the software, it has utility, and then maybe Metcalfe's law, network effects. Do you view it from all those 3 perspectives as well? And is there anything else that, you're like, yeah, and this other factor as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of those things. I think it's interesting just when it is like a utility token as well, just that, it's just a unit, you're buying units of compute and so forth, whereas Bitcoin being more of the digital gold. So there's different kind of ways to value it. I think one thing that's interesting, is that traditionally anyway, I think the lower in the stack you are, the more commoditized things become. So in some sense, the idea that, some of these things like Ethereum and so forth should just continue to go up in value kind of is, I have a little bit of trouble sort of getting over that sometimes, whereas it's a little more obvious with something like Bitcoin. But lately things just seem to be getting a little bit even over the top with some of the meme coins and so forth, where, okay, I guess this thing has value, but, it just starting to feel a little bit like, I think, what is it, financial nihilism or something, I think is the term that people have been using lately. And just a lot of people, trying to get in, and then, musical chairs not be the last one to get out. And I think, I don't know. I mean, it's bringing attention. I don't know if I love it, just for, when we're trying to build things, like real things in the space. But so I think that concept can kind of be taken a little bit too far. But then again, then you got to ask yourself, well, who am I to argue, right? Like, like whatever it is, I feel like the meme coin thing is almost more like a sports team. Like, you're like, I'm on team, Pepe or whatever it is. And I believe it in, and we're all in this together. And yeah, so, but yeah, that, again, going back to Web3 in general, it's just fascinating because there's so many, there's finance, there's like psychology, there's, political issues and philosophical, and there's so many different aspects that make it a really sort of intellectually stimulating area to be in as well.
Yeah, and to that point, I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with the meme coin situation, but I've been studying it, like trying to figure out what is happening here. Like, this is so ridiculous, some of these coins, but there's liquidity and capital coming into it. And then I think I heard Raoul Pal, a macro investor, said it's culture in the blockchain. So that's one aspect. But then I think the other thing is you have a truly global asset class. And I think of like the stock market in New York Stock Exchange. It's not accessible to everybody around the world. I don't think people in India and certain countries Egypt and whatever. But these tokens, I mean, you have a smartphone, man. You could be in Egypt or in Australia or Iceland, wherever, and you got a good internet connection. You can access it, and then you have many of these tokens are hard capped in a sense that they have a limited supply.
Mhm.
A lot of the tokens are staked. Let's say, for example, like Ethereum. So you have limited supply, and I think it's like a combination, a perfect storm of all these things that drives incredible value and hyper speculation. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's interesting. Just it is culture, digitized culture in a way. I think, there's value to digitized culture. I mean, so again, like who am I going to argue with
Yeah.
that? And I guess insofar as it's an instrument that has value, can be transmitted globally, as you said, there's a lot of liquidity, then like that's useful, right? And I mean, I think, personally, I'm more of the like, I think stable coins, for example, just for improving cross-border transactions and having those pools of liquidity to facilitate that, but also provide access to other markets.
Mm.
Provide a really good framework for that. But it really could be anything, right? It's just the prices are so volatile. So with some of those other things that it can make it difficult for facilitating those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, as I was saying, I think the digitized culture, that's a very interesting concept. And and again, getting back to what I was saying about like, yeah, there's just philosophical questions here that are
Yeah.
just very fascinating to think about, but I mean, there's no question that everyone's lives are moving more digital.
Mm.
So culture should move digital as well, right? And if you went back to the early 2000s or 90s and you said, hey, what shouldn't go to the internet, right? I mean, like, come on, like everything should move there. And now everything should move to be like digitally native.
Yeah, definitely agreement there. Now, you guys at Moonbeam are building incredible Web3 technology, meme coins aside, right? Let's talk about real world application and things like that. For those who don't know, tell us about Moonbeam and what makes it different.
Sure. So MoonBeam is a layer one blockchain. It's EVM compatible. It's deployed as a parachain on Polkadot.
Mm.
And I think, it was launched, we launched in January of 2022, but the project's been in the works for many years. And I think originally the idea was that we could combine the power of the substrate framework that kind of came from the Polkadot ecosystem
Mm.
and provide EVM compatibility, which would facilitate interconnectivity with other ecosystems more easily and provide an environment that's familiar to many developers, but at the same time leverage substrate technology. And I think we've largely succeeded. I think we've been called sort of the gateway to Polkadot, and other things of that nature. We have liquidity routing from say Ethereum into other parachains in the Polkadot ecosystem. The benefits of using the substrate stack, we get built-in, a very sophisticated built-in governance framework, excuse me. So we do all our upgrades through governance.
Mm.
And we can do forkless upgrades, which means we can move really quickly. So we do there's a new release, a chain upgrade every 6 weeks. So unlike say Ethereum or something like that, we can pivot very quickly. We've also exposed a lot of the underlying substrate things such as governance or even more advanced precompiles for doing transactions in batch or gasless things in sort of superior ways than you can do on Ethereum. So we've exposed those things through the EVM, and so that's sort of been kind of what we've been up to for the last couple of years, and especially sort of this focus on cross-chain infrastructure and connecting different ecosystems.
Oh, sorry, go
We've
ahead.
just we just had a big update to our roadmap, and sort of a refresh sort of strategy. And as part of that, there's big performance improvements. We're looking at reducing block times from 12 seconds to 6 seconds,
Mm.
8x throughput by increasing the gas limit of blocks. But we're also doing a lot of interesting things around account abstraction. I think we can do a lot better than what some of these EIP standards are proposing. where you've got a project called ZK Auth, which will allow for onboarding of Web2 users more easily and to have longer lived sessions so that you don't have to get prompted every time you want to do something, a transaction on the chain. So our new emphasis is really around a more integrated Web3 ecosystem where you're not having to like combine different, maybe even you don't want to have separate wallet software. It can be all built into a dApp. You want to provide the infrastructure so that dApp developers can build really compelling experiences that are going to be more easily accepted by to draw more people in.
Now you mentioned being a parachain via Polkadot. Why did you select Polkadot specifically? And is there plans to integrate with other blockchains out there?
Sure. Yeah. So, really it was the core project team, whereas I'm at the foundation. But I think the reasoning was, I think really they were looking at a couple of ecosystems, probably Cosmos and Polkadot. The reason being that both of those ecosystems could see that interchain communication was going to become very, very important. And I think, anyone with a reasonable computer science background will understand that no single blockchain can possibly handle all the if we put everything on chain, like it's just not doable. And so that problem would have to get solved at some point. You could say, well, maybe we can deal with that later. And I think some people did take that approach. And so many ecosystems now, like, Avalanche, Polygon, the layer twos, everyone has a different approach now to trying to solve this problem. But I think Derek Yu, who is the founder of the MoonBeam project, he had the foresight to see, hey, this is something that should be tackled earlier because it will make things easier down the road. As for why Polkadot over, say, Cosmos, I think just, there were a variety of reasons, but I think the substrate framework in particular made a lot of sense. The other thing with Polkadot is you kind of are outsourcing the security, right? So in the same way that a layer two is outsourcing security to Ethereum, that's what Polkadot does. And what that allows you to do is focus on what you do best rather than having to reinvent consensus and securing, doing that sort of the validation and securing of the transactions. So you can kind of leverage that. I mean, it doesn't make sense to have to build everything from scratch every time when you're launching something new, right? You want to stand on the shoulders of giants as much as possible and leverage sort of that best in breed technology. So the Polkadot people can focus on the core securing of all the transactions across all the parachains, and we can focus on providing the best integrated Web3 environment for dApp developers to deploy to.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Tell us about some of the use cases. What are people building on MoonBeam? Is it Web3 applications, tokenization of real world assets, and so forth?
Yeah, so we just announced a large innovation fund, which is going to be primarily focused, $10 million innovation fund, primarily focused on RWA projects and gaming, as well as probably starting to look at some other areas as DePIN and things of that nature. So we do have a lot of projects focused on gaming and providing gaming infrastructure, especially for cross-chain use cases. There are even cases where people are leveraging MoonBeam for some of the marketplace and so forth, or in gaming infrastructure, but then the games may actually be located on different chains or across multiple chains. And then we've had a lot of focus, particularly in some emerging markets, especially Brazil, where we've seen a lot of traction around RWAs servicing that market. And so, yeah, there's been a number of projects. We have actually a bunch of announcements coming up over the next month, so I can't reveal those. But there, one, for example, there's a group out of Brazil called Tokeniza that is focused on tokenizing real world assets, and they're doing some pretty interesting stuff. I mean, there's kind of the tokenized securities. Obviously, that's sort of a prime example. And for people in Brazil, that's really attractive because if there's concerns around sort of currencies and this kind of thing, or how their assets might be, if they want to sort of protect the value of their assets in the long term,
Mm,
they're looking for other products and looking at gaining access to international markets. So
mm,
that market is ripe for it. But just getting back to Tokeniza, I mean, they're doing, for example, in Brazil, I guess there's a lot of times where citizens will make a claim against the government for various reasons. They've been wronged in some way, and it's at all levels of government. And there's law firms that specialize in handling these cases. And there's a name for it, precatorias, I think, or something. I don't know. It's a Portuguese name. But what happens is when there's a judgment, it can take like weeks or months or even years for you to receive your settlement. Some of these people aren't really well banked or anything like that. So the idea is to tokenize those liabilities, and then a secondary market already exists where people will sell them at a discount to get the money right away, and then someone else is holding that
right.
that debt that the government owes. But however, there's lots of fraud and it's paperwork and difficult to track, and so they're tokenizing this process. And so that's something that wouldn't really occur to you or I, sort of living in North America, but just fascinating use case. I mean, they're looking at tokenized real estate and other financial instruments, but that just the breadth of applications for RWA is just astounding. And so
Mm,
they're leveraging MoonBeam. I think a lot of the RWA projects that are deploying to MoonBeam are attracted to the cross-chain capabilities because they understand that there's a lot of different markets and chains and so forth that they'll want to tap into and connect liquidity from various sources.
mm. Question for you, Aaron. And this is something I'm genuinely curious about. Um, as you guys are approaching like Web2 companies and you have, experience in Web2 and software and so forth, how are you pitching them to integrate Web3 or to transition to Web3?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a difficult sell. I mean, it can be.
Mm,
I think there's got to be something, in it for them. And so there are for enterprise, there can be, and especially with, I think with that RWA is showing, especially with some of the trade finance and so forth, a lot of efficiencies that could be gained.
mm,
So that's for the finance sector in particular. I think the more difficult sell is that if you are a more centralized Web2 company, what's in it for them? I mean, they can sort of say, hey, to their users, well, it's data ownership, and don't you want better data ownership or sovereignty or whatever? But I mean, if they have a good business already, then
mm.
and why give up that sort of competitive moat, right? I mean, if you're Twitter or Facebook or whatever, you're not incentivized to make that open and let users easily port to other platforms. So, but I think there are certainly applications in supply chain and other areas where there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained. And so,
Sure.
and whether it's just in reducing paperwork or sort of more manual or clunky things that take longer to settle or that cost more money. There's also just even things around access to capital and pulling in more capital, as well as I do think it's going to help a lot in terms of preventing fraud, as these technologies mature.
Yeah. Yeah. To your point, like certain industries, it absolutely makes sense for them to move right away because it, like you said, improves efficiencies and so forth. Um, but I'm curious, as far as the timeline, and this is a hard question because we saw it with the internet and so forth. Some people may be slow to adopt this technology, but eventually disruption is going to be at their door, where maybe a startup or a new competitor comes in and they're doing it better, and the consumer's like, oh, I like this better, because it allows
Mhm.
me to do all these great things. But these companies which are deep rooted and they have this stronghold on the market and they're making a lot of revenue. is it like over the next 5 to 10 years that maybe we start seeing that transition, or do you think it happens sooner?
Um, yeah, I don't know. These things, it is very hard to say. There's usually some um, event or there's something that sort of very causes things to happen very quickly. So it could be that, in the next couple of years, there's a killer use case or,
Mm.
something that gains network effects that starts sort of an avalanche. It's probably going to happen in specific industries.
Sure.
And I do think I think it's very well happening in sort of the RWA industry now. But I think, even then, like in with finance, there's bound to be some holdouts, right? And I think, just go like I kind of think of it a little bit. There's a lot of parallels with the industry I was in previously, which was involved in telecommunications as well. So some of the platform offering that we had included making phone calls internationally and so forth. And so, you had this new internet-based technology way of doing it. And then you had older like telcos and so forth that were regionally around the world. And some of them have monopolies and they were not keen to like move to an internet-based service
Right.
because it cuts into their margins, control, surveillance, maybe in some cases. And so they would have these holdouts. But so what we built was a global network where we would carry the traffic and then get local partners and then have the call sort of pop up there. And that's kind of what's happening, I think, with finance, stablecoins, cross-border settlement is, I mean, we can use things like stablecoins to easily move capital digitally from different parts in the world. But then you can have local banking partners and local financial institutions in those regions to then to handle sort of the last mile. And there's going to be ones that sort of hold out. But I think like as that progresses, what you find is instead of there being pockets of the digitized things, but like, and then the bigger bubble is like the traditional, it's going to invert. And the big, the big sphere will be all digitized and just be little pockets of the more traditional thing. And I think where that inflection point is, say for finance, is, it's difficult to say. I think with the kind of momentum we're seeing with RWAs, I think in finance we're going to see a sea change over the next, say, 5 years, where clearly it's headed in that direction, kind of not headed back in the reverse.
Now, you mentioned like Brazil and some of these other markets are, prime for introducing these solutions and tokenization of real-world assets. But here in the United States, we're seeing some big institutions are starting to test this, pilot it, and go through, different or trying different blockchains and so forth. Are you approaching any of the BlackRocks and these folks here in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking to some partners I think that are involved. I mean, there are ways to access some of these funds. So yeah, there's definitely those discussions are ongoing. I think one of the tricky things, especially with these tokenized assets, like the BlackRock fund and so forth, is that there are institutions. It's sort of for accredited investors, it's for institutional investors and so forth. So while there's a lot of momentum, there's still a challenge there in that it's not open to retail. And it is this is the thing that isn't talked about a ton, but it's all KYC'd and so forth. And then they're kind of like, well, and then from there, they're like, well, once you have it, it's up to you kind of what you do with it. Like if you want us to go sell it on this tokenized thing on secondary markets. But then, as part of the redemption, there's if you ever want to redeem, it's like, well, it's back to, you got to hand it off to somebody who's completed KYC kind of thing. Right. So it's, I think, and there's not a lot of transaction volume yet. And although the TVL is building, like I said, it's mainly institutional. And I think the attraction there is really for a lot of, frankly, a lot of companies in crypto who maybe are, for a while. I mean, it's difficult. Like if let's say you're a crypto foundation, it can be very difficult to get good banking services. It can be very difficult to get access to treasuries, right? So a tokenized treasury all of a sudden becomes very easy. So we've been in discussions with some of these, partners and so forth, but usually there's sort of an ask from the foundation to, deposit sizable amounts into these funds, right? It's oftentimes a tit for tat kind of thing. And so, as I said, we've been seeing a lot of momentum in Brazil. And I think we're going to start looking at some other emerging markets where it's a little more, servicing the needs of these new markets and opening up new markets and capital from say, less sort of institutional clients, right, or participants, I guess, market participants.
Mm. Now, do you believe that in Brazil and emerging markets that this technology might be adopted faster, given that they don't have the red tape or bureaucracy and this Goliath infrastructure that, for example, that we have in the United States?
Yeah, I think Brazil is still. I think they're making doing a lot of work on regulatory in this space. I mean, I think it's important regulation. I don't know. I'm sure there's be a lot of people who don't like what I say, but regulation is good, right? I mean, I hope people realize that, like, regulation by enforcement, as we've seen, is not good.
Right.
What we need is clarity, right? And that protects people, and you want that, and that's gonna, because then we're gonna have people building things that are building them in a responsible way. So you can't totally kind of just say, oh, we're just gonna push away all the red tape and just, so there still has to be that regulation. There has to be proper investor protection. But I do think that they're more motivated and there's a lot more demand. And that comes from and so that they will move quicker, I believe. And a lot of that is because they just don't have the mature financial rails that you and I are used to in North America. I mean, I think a real wake-up call, for the foundation, the MoonBeam Foundation was, I mean, we'll recall back to March of last year. You had Signature and Silvergate and Silicon Valley Bank, and all of a sudden it was like became really difficult for the foundation to get banking, right? And so then you get a firsthand taste of what it's like to be in some of these other markets where we take it for granted. And you're just all of a sudden you're like, well, where is a safe place to park cash, or and so this is what people are dealing with every day. They're just not getting great financial services. And I think similar to kind of mobile adoption in Africa and Europe, where instead of building out landlines everywhere and maturing their infrastructure that way, they leapfrog straight to mobile, right? And so I think what you'll see in these emerging markets is a leapfrog straight to kind of blockchain-based financial rails, and that will cause them to move quicker, I think, just out of a need, a necessity.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. I think I forgot to ask you earlier about, and you may have addressed this, but the protocol that MoonBeam uses as a blockchain. We know there's proof of stake, proof of work, and different things out there. What protocol does MoonBeam use? And also, if you could tell us about the GLMR token.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, great. I probably should have touched on this before, but yeah. So MoonBeam is proof of stake. It's a delegated proof of stake model. So, and the Glimmer token, GLMR, is our utility token. It's the native token of the network. So think of it as, we're an Ethereum compatible chain. So it's our Ethereum, basically. You need it to transact on the network, to deploy contracts, right? So it's the utility token. But it's also used in the security of the network, in the staking process. So as end users can delegate their stake to a collator, which are essentially block producers. So they produce the blocks that are then validated by the Polkadot network, the Polkadot validators. And then the collators themselves bond stake in the form of Glimmer as well, to be part of the active set of collators so that they can earn Glimmer as a reward. So there's inflation, which the emissions go to the people delegating their stake as well as the collators that are running the nodes. Glimmer is also used for, I mentioned our governance. It is used in the governance process, so token holders can vote on governance proposals. And like I said, we use that for protocol upgrades, also to change chain parameters, and to manage, opening up in the Polkadot ecosystem, even opening up a communication channel with other parachains. That has to be enabled through governance. And so often another parachain who will want to connect to MoonBeam so that they can have their assets listed on the DEXs on MoonBeam or in the other marketplaces on MoonBeam, they will come to our governance and put in a proposal to have a channel opened. And then, and as I said, so Glimmer is used in the governance voting process as well.
Now, you mentioned there's going to be some big announcements coming up soon. I know you can't tell us the details yet, but is there anything else on your 2024 roadmap you want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have some exciting partnerships we're announcing with Glacis, which is a abstraction layer, kind of sits on top of GMP protocol. So things like Wormhole, Axelar, and so forth. So I think that's pretty interesting because it provides what I like to think of as Web 2 reliability for Web 3. So right now, if you're making a cross-chain application, or let's say you're bridging stuff from one network to another as part of your application, you're probably dApp developers are currently relying on one GMP protocol like Wormhole, and if they say there's an issue with it, right, then maybe it's the route isn't working right now. Well, you're kind of stuck, right? Or let's say, God forbid it gets hacked or something like that, right? Then you have a serious problem. So you may want to have redundancy. And, just going back to my Web 2 days, I mean, we had a global network with redundant connections with different providers so that, if traffic couldn't flow on one, we just route it through another one. And so Glacis provides this layer to be able to do that, to provide redundancy, or also even, let's say you want to have a higher degree of security. It might be more costly, but you might have a message that has to go over two different routes and agree on the target chain before you accept the transaction. So then that way, if something's going wrong on one, you can avoid potentially catastrophic outcomes. Tansy is another partnership. So they're a app chain infrastructure team, and they're also deploying in Polkadot. And MoonBeam is connecting with them to provide kind of liquidity and access to sort of our DeFi venues and other sort of infrastructure that then app chains. I mentioned earlier, it doesn't make sense to kind of reinvent everything every time. So these app chains can focus on what they do best, and then they can leverage all the infrastructure that we've brought to MoonBeam. I think I mentioned the ZK Auth project already, but those, along with some of the other account abstraction technology that we're investing in, I think is pretty exciting because, as I said, I think it can really streamline or really improve the user experience when using Web3 applications. And so there's going to be a lot of focus in that area. But just generally, we're also just doing a lot to continually improve tooling and infrastructure and frameworks and so forth that are available to dApp developers so they can get going more quickly and build faster and, again, focus on what they do best.
That's exciting. And I'm excited for those upcoming updates, announcements. Let's talk about the crypto market at large. We've seen incredible growth, with the Bitcoin ETFs. Crypto regulations seem to be moving forward. What were your thoughts on the ETF launch and the performance so far?
Yeah, I mean, I to be honest, I haven't been paying super close attention to the performance so far, but I was surprised. I mean, I don't know where things change so quickly. It was like, it's not happening. It's not going to be approved. And then I was talking to someone, they're like, no, it's going to be approved. And I'm like, you're dreaming. What are you talking about? And I guess I missed something. And all of a sudden it was approved. It's just kind of shocking. And I think there's been a lot of speculation around, is this for political reasons or, but I think, and then, there was recently we found out that the SEC is sort of dropping its case against consensus. I think for that, I think the SEC just probably realized that they didn't want another embarrassment of sort of losing a case.
Hmm.
But yeah, really was surprised, taken by surprise. I mean, you would think like that they could put it off. I figured they would. I figured the SEC would just try to punt as long as they could, to try to defer. But like I said, I haven't really been paying a ton of attention to the inflows. I mean, obviously, the market hasn't been great as of late for a number of reasons, macro reasons, I think, and now we're headed into summer, so it'll be interesting to see. I don't know if Ethereum has the same brand awareness with more traditional investors that like I think most traditional investors are aware of Bitcoin, and that was probably huge excitement for them. So yeah, that'll be interesting to watch it play out for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And obviously, I know you're in Canada, so I don't I don't know how much you're keeping up with what's happening in the U.S., but also there's been like a 180 from many Democrats who were aligned with Elizabeth Warren against crypto, and many Democrats are now working with Republicans to get bills through the House, which will provide clarity. You mentioned earlier that regulations are needed that are balanced, protects consumers but allow innovation. Um,
Mhm.
how's Canada looking? I know you guys have had spot ETFs for a while, but regulation wise, do you feel you have the clarity there?
I think it's coming. I think, and I do pay very close attention to kind of what's going on in the U.S. for sure. We have had spot ETFs for quite some time, and I think the clarity is coming. I think Canada tends to be has to walk sort of a fine line. I think they've been more progressive,
Mm.
um, but at the same time we don't want to be too out of alignment with what's going on in the US. I mean, the US being like, the massive trading partner for Canada is very important. And so they don't want to really rock the boat, I think, too badly either. But, I think there hasn't been any kind of enforcement. I think they're just sort of, a little bit taking a wait and see approach. Like, I don't think there's been a really progressive approach like we've seen in Europe, which I think is just, I think what they're trying to do in Europe, I think um, is really great because they're sort of leading the way. It's kind of not awesome from the U.S. perspective, and I think it's a real missed opportunity. I think Europe realizes that they missed the boat kind of like with the internet and back in the sort of early 2000s.
Mm.
And as a result, all the huge technology companies are based in the United States. So I think they see an opportunity with the US not really making strong moves to take advantage of that and move a lot of the innovation and perhaps some of move the balance of power potentially with Web3 over there. But I do think we're starting to see some signs, like you said, when you see these bipartisan bills, and I think it's pretty disappointing that Joe Biden like vetoed what was a
So,
bipartisan effort. I mean, Congress can't seem to get anything done, right? And so you've got this thing where you actually have both parties coming together to get something done. Like, I don't know. I found that kind of disappointing, but I guess we'll see. I think there's a lot of open questions. I'm glad it does seem like people are finally engaging, and I don't know how much of that is politically motivated just from sort of Trump's recent announcement that he embraces crypto, and
mm.
maybe the Democrats feeling like they need to, there's some portion of the vote that could make the difference in certain jurisdictions. But anyway, regardless, it's great to see some progress being made.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I don't think anybody saw this coming. And you have a presidential candidate talking about crypto. And but I guess the reason that Donald Trump made that move is just the Biden administration under Elizabeth Warren's guidance was so on the other side of the spectrum. Like they weren't even neutral. It was just like, I'm building an
Right.
anti-crypto army. Like, why? It's just a technology.
Right.
They were
Yeah.
so crazy about it. So it almost forces the other side to say, "Oh, okay, you're negative about it. I'm going to be positive about it." Right? It's look, the game of politics is being played out here, but it's so fascinating that out of nowhere, this
Yeah.
wind of crypto into politics just started picking up.
Right. Yeah. And it's really too bad because I think like with Elizabeth Warren and these people are so anti-crypto, I think there's just a lack of understanding, right? I think that I think I don't know, at least in my mind, I think what a lot of crypto is about is like sort of fair access to markets. I think a lot of this should change. I mean, there's so many in traditional finance. I mean, we talk about MEV and front running and stuff. I mean, there's like whole industries like built around front running retail investors in traditional finance, right? And it's really a minority. Like when you look at the on the blockchain side, I mean, it's so rigged in the traditional finance toward the people who have direct access, and there's a lot of instruments, financial instruments that as a retail investor you can't get access to. And I think crypto has the promise to kind of open up those markets. And so really it should be something that, or at least in my mind, that like Democrats should be championing for. I think, just like I was saying before, it's important to have clear regulation to protect investors. I mean, I think, scams exist in any industry. I think, unfortunately, we're a big target right now, but it's wherever the money is, like there's going to be scams, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have good regulation that fosters innovation, but also ensuring that there are good players in the industry that are sort of following the rules. I mean, if you have those standards, then you're going to see less fraud and scams and so forth. So that's the best way forward.
Mm. And I wonder if part of it is, I think I've heard Elizabeth Warren talk about this. It's almost like they don't have full control or understanding. There's a lack of knowledge, but also this is kind of a blind spot for them. And they are, in addition to other governments around the world, building CBDCs, right? They want to take a fiat currency and put it on the blockchain. And I wonder if part of it is just try to slow this industry down so that they can get some control over it, maybe via the money supply, maybe because they're worried that
Mm-hmm.
people are leaving uh, how should I put it? They're leaving the normal rails, payment rails, and so forth, and going to
Mm-hmm.
stable coins and going to, I can send you some Bitcoin right now. I don't have to send you USD or a Canadian,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You think part of it is that, and they're
Maybe. I mean, look, I do think that there is some probably a well-founded concern that like even if like a ton of US dollars get digitized, that there could be some swan event that like completely rocks the US dollar. I mean, that's something that people need to take a close look at. And I think they're right to kind of do that analysis and maybe say, oh, slow down a little bit. But personally, I don't think CDBCs are the way. I mean, I think, there's obviously um, concerns around surveillance and privacy and so forth. And so I think the way that I look at it is more like banks, for example, are not government agencies. And so if you think about it more like, I think we'll probably see branded stablecoin instruments that are used for commerce. And so they're the issuers, they're holding the dollars, but then we can programmatically we can use like software to like make these systems more efficient to do cross-border settlement and so forth with these branded ones. And there'll probably be some larger players like Circle I think is well positioned, but I think we'll probably see some of these like maybe the JP Morgans of the world or Goldman or large banks even get into issuance and using that. And I think that's the way, and because people, you kind of need to, separate those things. Like there's the actual like money itself, and then there's the digitized versions, and then there's people that are sort of managing that. And I think that creates a better separation of powers. So you can get the benefits of it without putting it all the control with the government.
Yeah. All right, Aaron, I got some rapid questions here for you. First, if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
Well, I mean, you can see I'm a big Star Wars fan, but I don't know. I'd probably get in trouble with Disney, So, but I do some sort of sci-fi space theme. I'm a big fan of like also the Expanse universe. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but yeah, a space sci-fi based theme for sure.
Yeah, I'm same thing. I love space and the idea of space exploration. And I love Star Wars, so that would be mine as well. Rapid fire, favorite food,
Yeah, I gotta go with roast beef.
favorite musician or band,
I guess all time U2.
favorite movie. I think I might know the answer.
Well, actually, it might surprise you. Too hard to pin down to one Star Wars. So, actually, the Shawshank Redemption is my favorite movie.
It's a great movie. Favorite book.
Um, Tough one. I'm gonna go with a classic, The Count of Monte Cristo. I read it a long time ago, and it's really stayed with me. It's one of those classics.
Nice. And I think I may know the answer to this as well. But what's your hobby outside of work?
Well, again, that might surprise you. I'm snowboarding. I would put,
Okay,
living in Canada, you got to find something to do in the winter.
for sure. Aaron, pleasure chatting with you, man. And I'm excited for the updates coming up from MoonBeam. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.